Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Our first Spirit Talker is Brent Hogan. Brent works at CCH. His talk this morning is about visual arts, personal identity, and creative voice. Brent has shifted his classroom teaching from a traditional classroom to more of a personal teaching style and getting students to work on their creativity and their personal voice in his class. So I look forward, and thank you, Brent. And can you welcome him with us, please?
Thanks, everybody. Good morning, and thank you for having no other place to be. I can't see what's on here. So all right. If it's as scary as our technology, you'll have to bear with us. Okay, so why the change? Why did we bother in the visual arts to fix something that wasn't broken? I came in, took over a program that was already 23 years old based on perceptual arts, following the program of studies quite closely, giving kids the education that Alberta Learning had expected of them. But one of the things that I was having a problem with was that it hadn't replaced my own personal high school experience, which I found to be faulty. When I got into the post-secondary level, I found that my high school really hadn't done enough to prepare me to be successful. It prepared me to get accepted, but not to be successful. So that was the kind of thing I wanted to address when it was my turn. Let's see, the thing that was really bothering me was that I wasn't being provided with an intense experience. And as one of our mentors, Peter Mueller, would always say, people crave intense experiences. When you get into an art school situation, it's very intense. So if you're not prepared mentally and emotionally to support your own theories, then it's tough. So what I wanted to do was imbue a program here at Catholic Central that would allow the kids to experience something intense, something personal, and something highly autobiographical. That was the key to it all. So, what happened? Next slide. I'm going to have to assume that we're all synced up. Okay, no, you're ahead of me. No, you're not. Okay, the one called history. If we're at the one called history. I don't know. There we go. Okay, the thing was, the current program of studies for visual arts was written in the 1980s by probably some very well-meaning people, but I don't think they were artists. I don't think they really understood what it was that we were trying to do as visual communicators. The program of studies is very broadly written, it's easily interpreted, and it's not broken down by grade level. So what I was doing is I was traveling around the province as a visiting artist, and I was finding the same projects being done all over the province by different aged kids, different level of instruction. Everybody had the best of intentions, but how many Andy Warhol color schemes can you see in grades 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12? So the real issue there was the program of studies wasn't providing teachers with the platform to advance their kids in a scaffolded sense of learning. That was a real issue. The other problem was the kids were having difficulty connecting any relevancy to their own learning. If they're simply repeating projects from grade to grade and school to school, what does it have to do with them as individual learners? So we decided to make some changes. Next slide, please. I don't know how many of you graduated from Catholic Central. I know our entire staff did. So for a lot of us, they had grown up at Catholic Central, and they had grown up with the problem of overpopulation, basically due to a really successful transition to the quarter system and some major renovations that went on at the school. They were able to see success, but the place was packed. Like when Danielle and Brent and I first started, there was almost 1,000 students there, and it was really, really packed. We had enormous classes, and largely the problem was that the options sometimes were used as an option for administration as much as they were for the kids. So you had kids in your programs that weren't necessarily believers in what it was you were trying to do, especially given that the curriculum was just rolling over from year to year. What we wanted to create was that intense experience. It went through some pretty shaky years in the beginning where the kids basically rejected it. So you went from having really large classes to really small classes. You end up teaching more academics that way. But having stuck to our guns, we realized that giving them more rigor, more relevance was going to be the key, was going to be the issue. So, next slide. As I mentioned, the quarter system was already in place. This was something that was new to me. I had taught in many schools for many years previously, but I'd never been exposed to a 3-hour program on a daily basis. This was church for me. I thought that it was going to allow me to explore issues with the kids much more in depth. It was going to allow me to get to know the kids. It was going to allow them to get to know themselves. And we saw some success after about the second year of my being there. Next slide, please. What we had allowed them to do was essentially work in separated classes. The real goal was to try and get away from the split class model that had been existing in high schools for many years. So we pursued options that would allow us to separate Art 10, 20, and 30 into separate classes and give them separate and unique experiences. The problem that we had was physical space at the time. So when the West Campus opened, that kind of solved the problem in a nutshell. We were allowed to move Art 10 over to the west side and then use Art 20, 30 exclusively on the East Campus in the studios that were available. We had great leadership at the time who basically either had no idea what I was doing or were completely behind me. I never quite was clear on that. But we went ahead and made the changes anyways. Our numbers started to grow, and as a result, the program began to get a reputation that carries it forth to this day. The kids' work went from being tabletop work, which is essentially something that happens when you've got an overcrowding issue, to work that now was of legitimate scale. The kids were able to express themselves more creatively without having to worry about cleaning up and putting all their work away. Next slide. Okay, we're on the same track. Okay, the real issue came when I wanted to switch from a perceptually based program, and for those that don't understand, that might be something explained where you're just hitting on the elements and principles of art, using the language of art to describe physical objects. We wanted to move into the concept of motivation, what motivates a kid to make art. The thing that we were really noticing was that this sort of co-opted with the increase in globalization and the increase in social media. Kids were now becoming curious about the world around them, and that was what they wanted to express. They wanted to ask questions about their environment and ask questions about their role in that environment. It was kind of fun for me because I really didn't know anything about globalization. I didn't certainly know anything about social media, so I found myself being transferred to the back of the classroom and pushing them rather than being at the front of the class and pulling them along. So the kids wanted to make original statements, and they didn't want to be restricted to project-based learning anymore. So we made the fundamental change, next slide, to a problem-based learning, a PBL-based situation where the kids were now able to take problems that they had directed themselves and explore them in depth over a 10-and-a-half-week program. This combined with the Alberta Ed's High School Initiative, or High School Redesign. So with High School Redesign, we were given permission to basically change the things that needed to be changed and seek the outcomes almost in contradiction to the program of studies. The program morphed into a hybrid at this point, where Art 10 was still basically going to be rooted in perceptual art with the attainment of skills and concepts as its primary focus, but Art 20 and 30 were going to be conceptually based. Art 20 was going to move into a question of what is the role of art in society. Art 30 was largely going to be about why we have art in society and how these kids can contribute original thinking to the issues that they wanted to tackle individually. Next slide. The next step was to try and create an environment which really pursued this to an end. And one of the great things about art college is when you end up going there, they give you a little tiny cubicle that you get to call home. I wanted to reproduce this on a slightly larger scale. So we found some money and we created semi-private studios for Art 20 and 30 where the kids can now have their little cubby, and believe me, they take it pretty seriously. As you know, teenagers get pretty territorial. So for the first week or so, it's all blanket forts, and then they finally do settle in and start to set themselves up in teams, and they start to solve the problems of critical thinking, start to solve the problems of what it is they want to investigate, And by using each other as resources, the work got larger, the work got more complex. Next slide. The real issue came at the end of the day when I found that the kids were now enrolling in fine art programs at post-secondary levels in larger numbers. I think we've got over 16 kids now who are out pursuing visual arts in one form or another. To me, that was the big payoff. I had come full circle, sort of addressed the issue of why was my high school experience so lacking, and in this case, we had replaced it with relevance that the kids found in themselves. That was hugely important. I found that they were gifted with a real fighting chance of doing well at the post-secondary level, to the point where they might want to continue on afterwards, pursuing graduate studies and, God help you, a PhD. Okay? And what we really found was, even for the students who were not going to be art majors, it provided them with the creative initiative and the critical thinking skills that they were going to need to be successful in post-secondary and then afterwards in the world of work. So that was pretty much it. We really wanted to focus on the concept of personal identity, in that each piece that the kids were being asked to make was highly autobiographical. And if you just want to blast through some slides till we're done here. And work that was relevant to their own questions that they were asking. It creates an enormous problem when it comes to assessment, but who cares? It's only assessment, right? We're going to... Yeah, I'll pay for that one, I know it. Anyways, the program is continuing to expand. We now have opened a third studio at Catholic Central. So the Art 20s and the Art 30s each now have their own studio for this year. It's going to be highly experimental, but I think that the kids are really looking forward to it. Again, as I said, the program has started to grow by reputation, so our numbers are greater than they ever have been. And we've started to form some relationships with both the Art College up in Calgary and the university down here, which allows them to see what's next. So we're pretty excited about the change. We're pretty excited about the growth. And I don't really see us ever going backwards. Thank you very much.